The dirt under her knees was still soft from yesterday's rain, and Thomas Kane could see the tremor in her shoulders from 50 yards away as his horse picked its way through the Montana City Cemetery on that cold April morning in 1878. He had not intended to stop, had been riding through on his way to deliver a message to the ranch foreman 3 miles north, but something about the solitary figure kneeling before a fresh grave made him pull back on the reins. The woman wore black, her dress dusty at the hem, and her hair hung loose down her back in waves the color of autumn wheat. She did not turn when his horse snorted, did not acknowledge his presence at all, and Thomas found himself dismounting without quite knowing why. "Madam," he called softly, not wanting to startle her, "you all right out here?" She did not respond, and as he drew closer, he could see her hands were pressed flat against the wooden grave marker, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or simply words she needed to speak to whoever lay beneath the earth. Thomas stopped a respectful distance away, hat in his hands, waiting. "He loved the morning," she said suddenly, her voice hoarse as if she had been crying for days. "Used to say the world was cleanest just after dawn before people had a chance to muddy it up with their troubles." Thomas looked down at the grave marker. The name carved there read Samuel Brennan, and the dates told him the man had been only 26 when he died. "Your husband, my brother." She finally turned to look at him, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest at the sight of her face. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Fever took him last week. I buried him myself because I could not afford to pay anyone else to do it." The matter-of-fact way she said it struck Thomas harder than tears would have. He had seen grief before, had felt it himself when his parents died in a winter storm when he was 18, but there was something different about this woman's sorrow. It was not fresh and sharp but deep and ancient, as if this loss was only the latest in a long line of losses. "My name is Thomas Kane," he said, crouching down so he was closer to her level. "I work at the Double K Ranch just outside town. Is there someone I can fetch for you?" "Someone who should be here with you. There is no one." She looked back at the grave. "Samuel was all I had left. Our parents died on the trail coming west 5 years ago. Yellow fever. Samuel and I made it to Montana City with a wagon train, started a little homestead about 2 miles east of here. He worked odd jobs in town to keep us going while we tried to get the land producing. Then the fever came through town 3 weeks ago, and he was helping take care of the sick because that was just the kind of man he was, and then he got sick himself, and now he is gone." Thomas sat down properly in the grass, not caring that it was damp. "What is your name?" Faye Brennan." She pulled her hands back from the grave marker and folded them in her lap. "I should get back to the homestead. There are chickens to feed and a cow that needs milking." "When did you last eat?" The question seemed to confuse her. She blinked at him, her brow furrowing. "I had some bread yesterday morning, I think." "That was yesterday." Thomas stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let me buy you breakfast at the hotel restaurant." "You cannot take care of animals if you faint from hunger." Faye stared at his hand like she did not quite understand what it was for. "I do not know you." "No, but I know grief, and I know that sometimes a person needs another person to remind them that living is still worth doing." He kept his hand extended, patient. "One breakfast. Then I will ride you home to your homestead if you like. Make sure everything is secure there." She looked from his hand to his face, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she finally placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and Thomas steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "I cannot pay you back for breakfast," she said quietly. "I am not asking you to." Thomas led her toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but I walked here from the homestead. I have no horse anymore. Had to sell both of ours to pay for medicine that did not work." Thomas felt anger kindle in his chest at the injustice of it, at how the world could take and take from someone until there was almost nothing left. He mounted Rusty and then offered his hand again. "Come on up. He can carry us both the mile into town." Faye hesitated only a moment before accepting his help, and Thomas pulled her up behind him. She sat side saddle, one arm wrapped around his waist for balance, and he could feel how thin she had become through her dress. When had she last eaten a proper meal? How long had she been running herself into the ground trying to care for her dying brother? The ride into Montana City was quiet. The town was just waking up, shop owners opening their doors, a few early risers moving along the wooden sidewalks. Thomas could feel eyes on them as he guided Rusty to the Montana Hotel, and he knew there would be talk. A young woman riding with a man who was not her husband, both of them dressed for mourning, would give the gossips plenty to chew on. He found he did not care. He dismounted and helped Faye down, tying Rusty to the hitching post before offering her his arm. She took it, though he could feel the reluctance in her touch, as if she was not used to accepting help from anyone. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty at this hour, just a traveling salesman in the corner and the elderly cook, who also served as the waitress. Thomas guided Faye to a table near the window where the morning light fell warm and golden. "2 breakfast plates," Thomas told the cook, an Irish woman named Mrs. O'Malley who had fed him many times over the years. "Coffee too, please." Mrs. O'Malley looked at Faye with sympathy in her eyes. "You are the Brennan girl, are you not? I heard about your brother. I am so sorry, dear." Faye nodded but did not speak, and Mrs. O'Malley bustled away to fetch the food. Thomas took off his hat and set it on the chair beside him, studying the woman across from him. In the better light, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the pallor of her skin, the way her dress hung loose on her frame. "How old are you?" he asked. 23. "You?" 25. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Have you given any thought to what you will do now?" Faye's hands were folded on the table in front of her, and she stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. "I suppose I will keep working the homestead. Try to plant the spring crops, hope they come in before winter. Samuel and I had been planning to expand this year, maybe get some pigs, but now." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I do not know. I have not let myself think beyond getting through each day. That is a lot of work for one person, especially someone who has not been eating or sleeping properly." "What choice do I have?" Faye's voice cracked slightly. "That homestead is all I have left of my family. My parents' dreams are in that land, and Samuel's too. If I give it up, then what was it all for? What did they die for?" Thomas did not have an answer for that, and Mrs. O'Malley returned before he could try to formulate one. She set down 2 plates heaped with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes, along with 2 steaming cups of coffee. The smell made Thomas's stomach growl, and he saw Faye's eyes widen slightly at the sight of so much food. "Eat," Thomas said gently. "Please." Faye picked up her fork with a hand that trembled, and Thomas pretended not to notice as she took her first bite. He ate his own breakfast at a steady pace, watching her from the corner of his eye as she slowly began to eat more and more, as if her body was remembering what it felt like to be hungry for something other than grief. They ate in silence, and by the time they were finished, some color had returned to Faye's cheeks. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at Thomas with something that might have been curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "You are someone who needed help." Thomas met her gaze steadily, And I was someone who happened to be there to give it. Does it need to be more complicated than that? In my experience, people always want something in return. I want you to keep living, Thomas said simply. That is all. Faye looked away, her throat working as she swallowed. Some days I am not sure that is what I want. The quiet admission hit Thomas like a physical blow. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, and she startled at the contact but did not pull away. I know that feeling, he said. After my parents died, I spent a whole year thinking there was no point to any of it. I was 18, suddenly alone, wondering why I should bother to keep breathing when everything I loved was gone. But I did keep breathing, and eventually I found new reasons to be glad I had. What reasons? Faye's voice was barely above a whisper. Small ones at first. A good sunrise. A horse that needed me. A job that gave me purpose. Then bigger ones. Friends who became like family. Land I wanted to see. Dreams I wanted to chase. He squeezed her hand gently. Life is a series of reasons, and when you lose the big ones, you have to hold onto the small ones until new big ones come along. Faye's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I do not know if I have the strength for that. You have been taking care of a dying man, keeping a homestead running, and surviving on almost no food or rest for weeks. You have more strength than you know. Thomas released her hand and sat back. Let me help you, at least for today. Let me ride out to your homestead, see what needs doing, help you get things in order. No strings attached, no payment required. Just one person helping another. Faye studied him for a long moment, and Thomas could see her weighing her options, her pride warring with her exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. All right, just for today. The ride to Faye's homestead took about half an hour. The property was modest, maybe 40 acres of mostly flat land with a small cabin, a barn that had seen better days, and a chicken coop that leaned slightly to the left. Thomas could see where Samuel and Faye had started to plow a field for planting, the furrows only half finished. Faye slid down from Rusty before Thomas could help her, and stood looking at the cabin with an expression he could not quite read. Samuel built that, she said. Our father helped at first before he got sick, but Samuel did most of it himself. He was good with his hands, could fix anything. Thomas dismounted and led Rusty to the barn, finding a stall for him and some hay that was still good. When he emerged, Faye was scattering feed for the chickens, her movements automatic. A thin dairy cow stood in a small corral beside the barn, and Thomas went to examine her while Faye finished with the birds. She is getting old, Faye said, coming to stand beside him. We got her from a neighbor 2 years ago. She does not give as much milk as she used to, but she is gentle. She looks healthy enough. Thomas ran his hand along the cow's flank. Have you been milking her regularly, most days? Faye's voice was tired again. Sometimes I forget. Thomas turned to look at the cabin. Can I see inside? I want to make sure your roof is sound before the next rain. Faye led him to the cabin, and Thomas had to duck slightly to clear the doorway. Inside was a single room with a pot-bellied stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and a small shelf holding a few dishes and supplies. It was clean but sparse, and Thomas could see where the chinking between the logs needed repair in several places. Samuel slept in the barn, Faye said, following his gaze. We always meant to build a second room, but there was never enough time or money. Thomas walked around the space, checking the roof beams and the floorboards. Everything was solid enough, though it could use some maintenance. He noticed a rifle mounted on the wall and was relieved to see it was well maintained. At least she had a way to defend herself out here. When did you last hunt? He asked. Samuel shot a deer about a month ago. I have been living on that and the eggs and milk, plus some preserves we put up last fall. Faye sat down in one of the chairs, and Thomas could see the exhaustion pulling at her again. There is probably a week's worth of venison left, maybe less. Thomas nodded slowly, forming a plan. Here is what I think. You need to rest properly, eat properly, and let your body recover from the last few weeks. Your homestead needs repairs that are hard to do alone, and you need to get those crops in the ground soon or you will miss the planting season. I can help with all of that if you will let me. Faye shook her head. I told you I cannot pay you. I am not asking for money. Thomas pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. I have an idea if you are willing to hear it. The Double K Ranch is always looking for help during spring and summer. The owner, John Keller, is a good man, and he pays fair wages. I could talk to him, see if he would hire you on for kitchen work or laundry, something you could do while still managing your homestead. The ranch is only about 4 miles from here, easy enough to ride back and forth if you had a horse. I do not have a horse, Faye reminded him. Not yet, but the ranch has plenty. I am sure we could work something out, maybe let you borrow one in exchange for your work. Thomas leaned forward. Meanwhile, I can come here on my days off, help you with the heavy work, get your fields planted and your buildings repaired. By the time fall comes, you will have crops to harvest and money saved from your wages. You will be in a better position to decide what you want to do long term. Faye was quiet for a long time, her eyes moving around the cabin that she and her brother had made into a home. Why would you do all this? You still have not answered that question properly. Thomas considered his words carefully. When my parents died, a rancher named Bill Thompson took me in. He did not have to. I was just some orphaned kid who knew next to nothing about cattle or horses, but he gave me a job anyway, taught me everything I know, treated me like I mattered. He told me once that kindness is not something you pay back but something you pass forward. So that is what I am doing, passing forward what was given to me. And if I cannot do the work, if I am not strong enough, then we will figure something else out. Thomas stood up. But I think you are stronger than you believe. I think you have been so busy surviving that you have forgotten you are allowed to live. Faye looked up at him, and for the first time since he found her at the grave, Thomas saw something other than grief in her eyes. It was small and fragile, but it looked like hope. All right, she said. I will try. Thomas spent the rest of that day working on the most urgent repairs. He patched the chinking in the cabin walls, fixed the lean in the chicken coop, and reinforced a weak section of the corral fence. Faye tried to help, but he could see she was barely staying on her feet, so he convinced her to rest inside while he worked. When the sun began to set, Thomas found her asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. He started a fire in the stove and found the venison she had mentioned, along with some potatoes and carrots that were starting to sprout, but were still good enough to eat. He was not much of a cook, but he managed to put together a simple stew, and the smell of it woke Faye just as he was ladling it into bowls. She blinked at him in confusion, then at the bowls on the table. You made food. I made an attempt at food, Thomas corrected, sitting down. Whether it is edible remains to be seen. Faye took a tentative bite and then another, quicker one. It is good, thank you. They ate together as darkness fell outside and Thomas found himself studying her face in the firelight. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the grief that shadowed her eyes, and everything to do with the strength he could see beneath it. This was a woman who had buried her parents and her brother, who had worked herself nearly to death trying to hold onto the only thing she had left, and who was still here, still fighting, still trying. I should go, Thomas said when they finished eating. It is getting dark and I need to get back to the ranch, but I will ride out to talk to Mr. Keller tomorrow, see about getting you that job. Can you hold on until then? Faye nodded. I can hold on. Thomas stood and collected his hat. At the door, he turned back. "Lock this behind me. And if anything happens, if anyone comes around who should not, you fire that rifle into the air and I will hear it at the ranch." "You are coming back then?" Faye's voice was soft. "I am coming back," Thomas promised. "You have my word on that." The ride back to the Double K in the dark was cold, but Thomas barely noticed. His mind was full of storm cloud eyes and the weight of grief that one person should not have to carry alone. He had meant what he said about passing kindness forward, but there was something else too, something he was not quite ready to name. He found himself wanting to see her smile. John Keller was a bear of a man in his 50s with a graying beard and eyes that missed nothing. When Thomas found him in his office the next morning and explained the situation, Keller listened without interrupting. "This the Brennan girl?" Keller asked when Thomas finished. "I heard about her brother. Shame about that. Samuel was a good worker when we hired him for odd jobs." "She needs work, sir. She is trying to keep her homestead going, but she cannot do it alone and she has no money for help." Keller leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas. "You are asking me to hire a woman you just met yesterday to work in my kitchen?" "Yes, sir." "And you want to loan her a horse to get back and forth?" "Yes, sir." "And you plan to spend your days off helping her with her homestead?" Thomas met his boss's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir." Keller was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "She must be something special to inspire this much chivalry." Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks but did not look away. "She is someone who deserves a chance, sir. That is all." "All right, Kane. Bring her by tomorrow. I will talk to my wife, see if we can use another pair of hands in the house. And you can take that old mare, Daisy, for her to use. Lord knows we have enough horses around here." Keller pointed a finger at Thomas. "But if this girl turns out to be trouble, it is on your head." "She will not be trouble, sir. I would stake my job on it. You just might be doing that." But Keller was smiling and Thomas knew the matter was settled. He rode back out to Faye's homestead immediately, anxious to tell her the news. He found her in the barn, mucking out the cow's stall, and she looked up in surprise when he appeared in the doorway. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would." Thomas took off his hat. "And I have good news. Mr. Keller will meet with you tomorrow about working in the house at the ranch. His wife manages the domestic help, and he thinks she will want to hire you. Plus, he is letting you borrow a horse for as long as you need." Faye set down her pitchfork, her eyes wide. "Just like that, just like that." Thomas could not help but smile at her expression. "Can you be ready to ride out to the ranch around 9 tomorrow morning? I will come fetch you." "I only have 2 dresses," Faye said, looking down at herself. "One I am wearing and one that is even older. I do not have proper clothes for meeting with a rancher and his wife." "They are not fancy people. Wear your best dress and be yourself. That will be enough." Thomas picked up the pitchfork. "Now go inside and rest some more. I will finish this." "You do not have to keep doing this." But there was no real protest in Faye's voice. "I know." Thomas started working on the stall. "I want to." Faye stood watching him for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the cabin. Thomas worked until the barn was clean, then tended to Rusty and the cow before heading inside. He found Faye had made coffee, and they sat at the table drinking it while the afternoon sun slanted through the window. "Can I ask you something?" Faye said. "Anything. Do you have a girl?" "Someone waiting for you back at the ranch?" The question surprised Thomas, and he shook his head. "No, I have been too busy working to think much about courting." "But you are 25. Most men your age are married with children by now." "Most men did not spend their late teens figuring out how to survive alone." Thomas took a sip of his coffee. "What about you? Was there ever anyone special?" Faye looked down at her cup. "There was a boy back east before we came west." We talked about getting married someday, but when my parents decided to leave, he would not come with us. I have not thought about him in years. Do you ever regret coming west? No. Faye's answer was immediate. My parents' dream was to have their own land, to build something that belonged to them and could not be taken away. Even though they died before they could really see it through, I am glad we tried. I am glad we had those years of hoping. Her voice dropped. Though I wish it had not cost me everyone I loved. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. It was becoming a habit, this touching, and he found he did not want to stop. You are still here. Your family's dream is still here. That is not nothing. Faye turned her hand in his, her fingers threading through his. I keep waiting to feel like myself again, like the person I was before the fever came through, before Samuel got sick, but I do not think that person exists anymore. Maybe that person does not need to exist. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. Maybe you get to decide who you are now based on who you want to be, not who you were. I do not know who I want to be. Then we will figure it out together. Faye looked up at him, and Thomas saw tears on her cheeks. You should not make promises like that. You barely know me. I know enough. Thomas released her hand and stood up. I should get back to the ranch, but I will be here at 9 tomorrow morning. Try to sleep tonight, really sleep, not just that half-awake thing you have been doing. How do you know I have been doing that? Because I did the same thing for a year after my parents died. I know what grief looks like, Faye. I can see it on you like a coat you cannot take off. She walked him to the door, and they stood there for a moment in the fading light. Thank you, Faye said quietly, for everything. For not leaving me at that grave, for giving me a reason to keep going. You would have found a reason eventually. I just helped speed things up. Thomas put on his hat. Lock the door, and remember, rifle shot in the air if anything goes wrong. I will remember. Thomas rode back to the Double K as the first stars appeared, and he caught himself thinking about the way Faye's hand had felt in his, the way her eyes had looked when she smiled briefly at something he said. It had been barely 2 days since he found her at her brother's grave, but already he could not imagine not knowing her. The next morning dawned clear and warm, and Thomas was up with the sun. He did his morning chores at the ranch quickly, then saddled Rusty and the mare Daisy, a gentle bay with a patient temperament. He tied Daisy's lead rope to his saddle and rode out to Faye's homestead with his heart beating faster than it should. She was waiting outside the cabin when he arrived, wearing a dress that was faded and patched but clean. She had braided her hair and pinned it up, and in the morning light, Thomas thought she looked like hope given human form. Is this all right? Faye asked, gesturing at her dress. It is the best I have. You look perfect. Thomas dismounted and led Daisy over. This is Daisy. She is yours to use for as long as you need. Mr. Keller says she is getting older, but she is still steady and reliable. Faye approached the mare slowly, reaching out to stroke her neck. Daisy whickered softly and pushed her nose into Faye's shoulder, and Faye laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. She likes you, Thomas said, something warm spreading through his chest at the sound of that laugh. I like her too. Faye continued petting the mare. I have not had a horse since we sold ours. I forgot how nice they are. Thomas helped her mount, and they rode together toward the Double K. The morning was beautiful, the mountains in the distance still capped with snow, the valley greening with spring growth. Thomas pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her stories about the ranch and the people who worked there, trying to ease the nervousness he could see in the line of her shoulders. The Double K Ranch was one of the largest spreads in the territory, with hundreds of cattle and dozens of employees. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch, and several other buildings dotted the property, including bunkhouses, barns, and storage sheds. Thomas led Faye to the main house and helped her dismount, tying both horses to the rail. "Remember," he said softly, "just be yourself." John Keller and his wife Margaret met them at the door. Margaret was a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. She looked Faye up and down with an assessing gaze, but there was no judgment in it. "You must be Miss Brennan," Margaret said. "I am so sorry about your brother. Samuel did some work for us last year, and he was a fine young man." "Thank you, madam." Faye's voice was steady despite her obvious nerves. Margaret gestured for them to come inside, and they followed her to a sitting room that was comfortably furnished. Thomas started to sit down, but Margaret waved him away. "Go on, Thomas. I will speak with Miss Brennan alone. You can wait outside." Thomas looked at Faye, who gave him a small nod, and then he left, though he found himself pacing the porch anxiously. Through the window, he could see Margaret and Faye talking, though he could not hear what they were saying. The conversation seemed to go on forever, but finally the door opened and both women emerged. "Miss Brennan will start tomorrow," Margaret announced. "We can use help in the kitchen and with the laundry. The work is not easy, but the pay is fair and includes noon meals. She will work 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, with Sundays off." Relief flooded through Thomas. "Thank you, Mrs. Keller." "Thank Thomas," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. "He spoke very highly of you, Miss Brennan. I trust you will prove him right." "I will do my best, madam." They said their goodbyes, and Thomas walked Faye back to the horses. "See, I told you it would be all right. I am still nervous." Faye mounted Daisy with more confidence this time. "What if I do something wrong? What if they decide I am not worth keeping? Then you will figure out something else." Thomas swung up onto Rusty. "But I do not think that is going to happen. You are smart and you are a hard worker. They will see that." They rode back to Faye's homestead, and Thomas spent the afternoon helping her plant the first section of her field. It was hard work under the warm sun, but Thomas found he did not mind. Faye worked beside him without complaint, and they fell into an easy rhythm that felt natural. As they worked, they talked. Thomas told her about Bill Thompson, the rancher who had taken him in, and how he had died 2 years ago of a heart problem, leaving the ranch to his son, who had then sold it. That was how Thomas had ended up at the Double K, looking for new work and a new place to call home. Faye told him about her childhood back east in Ohio, about her father who had been a blacksmith and her mother who had taken in sewing, and how they had saved for years to afford the wagon and supplies for the journey west. She talked about Samuel, about how he had been both her brother and her best friend, and how empty the world felt without him in it. "It gets easier," Thomas said as they took a break in the shade of the barn. "Not because you miss them less, but because you learn to carry the missing. It becomes part of you instead of something crushing you." "How long did it take you?" "About a year before I could think about my parents without wanting to break down. Maybe 2 before I could remember the good times without it hurting so much." Thomas wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "But everyone is different. There is no right way to grieve." Faye was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? Something I have not been able to say out loud. Anything. There is a part of me that is angry at Samuel for dying, for leaving me alone. I know that is terrible and unfair, but I cannot help feeling it. It is not terrible." Thomas turned to look at her. "I was angry at my parents too, for deciding to take that shortcut through the mountains in winter, for not listening when people told them to wait. Being angry does not mean you did not love them. It just means you are human. I thought I was a terrible person for feeling that way. You are not terrible. You are grieving." Thomas stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get a little more done before I have to head back." They worked until the sun began to set, and by then they had planted nearly a quarter of the field. Thomas was exhausted but satisfied, and he could see that Faye was tired too, but in a good way, the kind that came from honest work. "You are going to be sore tomorrow," Thomas warned as he prepared to leave. "I am already sore." But Faye was smiling slightly. "Thank you for today, for all of this. I will come by after you finish work tomorrow. Make sure you get home safe your first day." Thomas mounted Rusty. "And remember, if you need anything before then, send word to the ranch. Someone will find me." "I will." Thomas rode away into the gathering darkness, and when he looked back, he could see Faye standing in the doorway of her cabin, a small figure haloed in lamplight. Something in his chest tightened, and he recognized the feeling for what it was. He was falling for her. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. Faye would ride to the Double K each morning and work until sunset, and Thomas would meet her there when he could to ride home with her. On his days off, he would spend hours at her homestead, helping her plant and repair and build. Slowly, the property began to look cared for again, and even more slowly, Faye began to look alive again. Thomas found himself living for the moments they spent together. The way she laughed when Daisy tried to steal her hat, the concentration on her face when she was learning to patch a roof, the sound of her voice when she sang softly while working in her garden. He was careful not to push, not to demand more from her than she was ready to give, but he could feel the connection between them growing stronger. Margaret Keller noticed, of course. One afternoon, when Thomas stopped by the kitchen for water, she cornered him by the pump. "You are courting that girl," she said. It was not a question. Thomas felt his face heat. "I am helping her. You are doing both, and do not pretend otherwise." But Margaret was smiling. "She is a good girl, Thomas. She works hard, never complains, and the other women in the house like her. But she is fragile still. You need to be careful with her heart. I would never hurt her. Not intentionally, no, but hearts are easy to break even with the best intentions." Margaret handed him a dipper of water. "Just take your time, let her heal. She will let you know when she is ready for more." Thomas took the advice to heart. He continued helping Faye, continued spending time with her, but he did not speak of the feelings growing in his chest. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was he was afraid. Afraid she did not feel the same way. Afraid he would push too hard too soon and lose her completely. Then came a Sunday in late May, warm and golden, when everything changed. Thomas had ridden out to Faye's homestead early, planning to help her with some fence mending. He found her sitting on the porch step, still in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was not crying, but her face had that distant look he had not seen in weeks, and his heart sank. "Faye," he dismounted quickly and went to her. "What is wrong? What happened?" "It is Samuel's birthday," she said quietly. "He would have been 27 today." Thomas sat down beside her on the step. "I am sorry, I did not know. I woke up and my first thought was that I needed to make him breakfast, that I should bake him something special, and then I remembered." Her voice cracked. "He is not here to have breakfast with anymore. He is not here for birthdays or holidays or any of it. He is just gone." Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, and Faye turned into him, pressing her face against his chest. He held her while she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring soft words he was not sure she could even hear. When the tears finally slowed, she pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I thought I was getting better." "You are getting better. But grief is not a straight line. There will be good days and bad days, and today is a bad day. That is allowed." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "You are allowed to have bad days, Faye. Will you stay with me today?" The question was soft, almost hesitant. "I do not want to be alone." "I will stay as long as you need me to." They spent the day quietly. Thomas convinced her to get dressed and eat something, then they walked out to Samuel's grave together. Faye had placed wildflowers there the week before, and they were still fresh and bright against the wooden marker. "Tell me something good about him," Thomas said. A happy memory. Faye thought for a moment. When I was 16, there was a dance in town, back in Ohio. Samuel was 18, and he noticed that I did not have anyone to dance with because I was too shy to talk to boys. So he danced with me, every single dance, even though his friends teased him for it. He told me that I was beautiful and smart and that any boy who did not see that was not worth my time. Thomas smiled. He sounds like he was a good brother, the best. Faye knelt down and touched the grave marker. I hope he knew how much I loved him. I hope he knows now wherever he is. He knows, Thomas said with certainty. Love like that does not just disappear. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and Thomas made them lunch while Faye sat at the table and told him more stories about Samuel. About the time he fell out of a tree trying to rescue a cat. About how he used to sing while he worked, even though he could not carry a tune. About the way he made up silly rhymes to make her laugh when she was sad. As she talked, Thomas could see the grief lifting slightly, could see her remembering her brother with love instead of just pain. And when the sun began to set and Thomas knew he should leave, Faye walked him to the door and caught his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, for listening, for making this day bearable. You do not have to thank me." Thomas looked down at their joined hands. "I care about you, Faye." "Surely you know that by now." "I do." She looked up at him, and in her eyes Thomas saw something new, something warm and wondering. "I care about you too, Thomas, more than I probably should after such a short time." His heart was pounding now. "Is there a rule about how long you are supposed to wait before you care about someone? If there is, we are both breaking it." Faye stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I have been so lost in my grief that I did not realize what was happening until today. But sitting here with you, having you hold me while I cried, listening to you talk about Samuel like he mattered to you even though you never met him. Thomas, I think I am falling in love with you." The words hit Thomas like lightning, illuminating everything. "Faye," he breathed, and then he was kissing her, gentle and careful and full of all the feelings he had been holding back. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and Thomas felt like he had finally found something he did not even know he had been looking for. When they broke apart, both of them were breathless. "I am falling in love with you too," Thomas said. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you at that grave." Faye laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Thomas had ever heard. "That is a terrible place to fall in love." "It is a perfect place." Thomas pulled her close again. "Because that is where your new life started, where our story began." They stood there in the doorway as the sun set, holding each other, and Thomas knew that everything had changed. This was not just helping anymore, not just passing forward a kindness. This was love, real and deep and transformative. Over the next few months, Thomas and Faye grew closer in every way. He continued helping with her homestead, but now there was an understanding between them, an acknowledgement of what they meant to each other. They stole kisses in the barn and held hands while watching sunsets. Thomas met her at the ranch every evening to ride home with her, and everyone could see they were courting. John Keller pulled Thomas aside one day in July. "I suppose you will be wanting to marry that girl eventually." "Yes, sir, if she will have me." "When you do, I have a proposal for you." Keller leaned against the fence rail. "I have been thinking about expanding operations, maybe starting a smaller satellite ranch on the east side of the valley. I need someone I trust to manage it, someone who knows cattle and horses and is not afraid of hard work. The job comes with a house and a salary plus a share of the profits." "Interested?" Thomas stared at his boss. "Sir, I do not know what to say. Say yes. Or say you need to talk to your girl first since this would affect her too." Keller smiled. "Either way, think about it. The job is yours if you want it." That evening, Thomas told Faye about the offer. They were sitting on her porch, watching the stars come out, and Faye was quiet for a long time after he finished. "That is an incredible opportunity," she finally said. "It is. But it would mean moving, building a life somewhere new. I would not take it unless you were willing to come with me." Thomas took her hand. "Faye, I know we have not been courting long, but I love you. I want to marry you, want to build a life with you. What do you think?" Faye turned to look at him, her eyes shining. "I think yes. Yes, you will marry me, or yes, you will think about it. Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Kane." Faye was laughing now, tears streaming down her face. Yes to all of it, the job and the house and the life together. Yes. Thomas kissed her then, deep and long and full of promises. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I do not have a ring yet. I do not need a ring, I just need you. You will get both." Thomas pulled her close. "When do you want to get married?" "Soon." "I do not want to wait." Faye looked up at him. "Is that too forward? Should I pretend to need time to plan?" "I do not want to wait either." Thomas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "How about next month?" "That will give us time to arrange things, but not so much time that I have to go crazy wanting you to be my wife." "Next month," Faye agreed, and they sealed it with another kiss. They were married on a warm August afternoon in the church in Montana City. Margaret Keller helped Faye make a new dress, pale blue with white lace, and several of the women from the ranch attended as guests. John Keller stood up as Thomas's best man, and the elderly pastor who had buried Samuel performed the ceremony. Thomas would never forget the moment Faye walked down the aisle toward him, her face radiant with joy. This was the woman he had found kneeling at a grave just 4 months ago, broken and hopeless. And now she was choosing to bind her life to his, choosing happiness and love, and a future she had almost given up on. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and Thomas kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They spent their wedding night in Faye's cabin, which would remain theirs until they moved to the new ranch site in the spring. Thomas carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then he set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Mrs. Kane." "I love you too, Mr. Kane." Faye reached up to loosen his tie. "Now stop talking and kiss me." Thomas was happy to oblige. They spent the night learning each other, gentle and careful and full of wonder. In the morning, Thomas woke to find Faye watching him, her head pillowed on his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, stroking her hair. "How different my life is now from what I thought it would be 4 months ago. If you had told me then that I would be married and happy, I would not have believed you." Faye traced patterns on his chest. "You gave me back my life, Thomas. You gave me reasons to keep living." "You gave yourself those reasons. I just reminded you they existed. We can both be right." Faye kissed him softly. "Thank you for not leaving me at that grave, for seeing something in me worth saving." "I saw everything worth saving." Thomas pulled her closer. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how extraordinary you are." They stayed in bed until the sun was high, then got up and made breakfast together. It was the first of many mornings they would share, and Thomas found he loved the domesticity of it, the simple joy of being with someone you loved. The next months were busy ones. Thomas continued working at the Double K while also beginning preparations for the new ranch. John Keller had purchased land about 15 miles east, and Thomas rode out regularly to survey it and plan where to build. Faye continued working in the house until October, when Margaret told her she should stop and focus on her own home. "You are part of the family now," Margaret said, hugging Faye tightly. "You come visit us and we will visit you, but you do not need to work for us anymore. Go be a wife and help your husband build his dream." In November, Faye discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas on a cold evening, both of them bundled by the fire in their cabin, and Thomas felt joy explode in his chest so bright it almost hurt. A baby. He could not stop smiling. Are you sure? I am sure. Faye took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Probably due in late June or early July. Are you happy? Happy does not begin to cover it. Thomas kissed her long and sweet. You are giving me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I could want. How could I be anything but happy? I was worried, Faye admitted. We have only been married 3 months. What if it is too soon? It is not too soon. It is exactly the right time. Thomas pulled her into his lap. We are going to be a family, Faye. A real family with a baby and a home and a future. Your parents and Samuel would be so happy for you. At the mention of her brother, Faye's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears. I wish they could meet you. I wish they could see all of this. I wish I could have met them too. Thomas wiped her tears away with his thumbs. But I think they know somehow. I think they are looking out for you, wherever they are. That winter was hard in some ways, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Thomas and Faye were warm and happy in their cabin. Thomas spent his days working with the construction crew that was building the house and barns at the new ranch, and Faye spent hers preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, making plans. In March, they moved into the new house. It was larger than the cabin, with 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a big stone fireplace. Faye cried the first time she saw it, and Thomas held her, understanding without words that these were tears of joy and grief mixed together, happiness for what she had and sorrow for what she had lost. They would have loved this house, she said, meaning her family. Then we will fill it with so much love that they will feel it wherever they are, Thomas promised. The ranch slowly came together over the spring. Thomas hired a small crew of hands, bought cattle and horses, and began building the operation he had dreamed of. John Keller came to visit regularly, offering advice and support, and Margaret brought Faye baby clothes and words of encouragement. In late June, when the summer heat was just beginning to settle over the valley, Faye went into labor. Thomas rode at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor from Montana City, then spent the next 12 hours pacing the floor while Faye labored in their bedroom. Margaret had come to help, and she periodically emerged to tell him everything was progressing well. But Thomas would not relax until he heard the cry of his child. When it finally came, high and strong and perfect, Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief. Margaret opened the door, her face beaming. You have a son. Come meet him. Thomas went into the bedroom on shaking legs. Faye was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. When she looked up at him, her smile was so full of love that Thomas felt his eyes burn with tears. Meet our son, she said softly. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in Faye's arms. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. When Thomas reached out to touch one of those little hands, the baby's fingers curled around his, and Thomas felt his heart expand impossibly larger. He is beautiful, Thomas whispered. You are both beautiful. What should we name him? Faye asked. Thomas had been thinking about this for months. What about Samuel? After your brother, Faye's eyes filled with tears. You would do that. Your brother was a good man, and he helped make you the woman you are. I want our son to carry his name, to grow up knowing about the uncle who would have loved him. Thomas leaned down to kiss Faye's forehead. Samuel Kane, what do you think? I think it is perfect. Faye looked down at the baby. Samuel Kane, welcome to the world, little one. We are so happy you are here. The first year of Samuel's life was one of the happiest times Thomas had ever known. He loved being a father, loved watching his son grow and change, loved seeing Faye bloom into motherhood. The ranch prospered, the cattle thrived, and Thomas felt like he had finally found his place in the world. On the first anniversary of his marriage to Faye, Thomas took her out to the spot where he had built a small marker for her family. It stood on a hill overlooking the ranch, 3 wooden crosses bearing the names of her parents and Samuel. Faye came here regularly to talk to them, to tell them about her life and her son and the happiness she had found. "I have been thinking," Thomas said as they stood looking at the crosses, baby Samuel sleeping against his shoulder. "We should plant flowers here, maybe some of those wildflowers you like, so there is color and life." "I would like that." Faye leaned into him. "Thank you for understanding how important this is to me, for not thinking it is strange that I still talk to them. It is not strange at all. They are your family, and they deserve to be remembered." Thomas shifted Samuel to his other shoulder. "I talk to my parents sometimes too when I am alone. Tell them about you and Samuel, about the life I am building. I like to think they are proud of me." "I am sure they are." Faye looked up at him. "Just like I am sure my family is proud of me, for surviving, for choosing to live instead of giving up, for finding you." "We found each other," Thomas corrected. "And I will never stop being grateful for that day at the cemetery. The worst day of your life led to the best days of mine." They stood there as the sun set, the 3 of them a family, with the memory of those who had come before watching over them. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the grief and loss and hard-won joy. He thought about the woman beside him, who had been so broken when he found her and who was now so whole. He thought about the son in his arms, a living promise of a future bright with possibility. Life had been hard for both of them, had taken much and asked for more, but standing here on this hill with everything he loved, Thomas knew it had all been worth it. 2 years later, Faye gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes, and Samuel was instantly smitten with his baby sister. Thomas would often find the toddler sitting by Rose's cradle, singing to her in his high, sweet voice. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas became known in the territory as an honest dealer and a fair boss, and the Kane Ranch developed a reputation for quality cattle and horses. Faye kept a garden that was the envy of the county, and she became known for her kindness, always willing to help a neighbor in need. On their 5th anniversary, Thomas and Faye stood on the porch of their home, watching Samuel chase Rose through the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. Thomas had his arm around his wife's waist, and she leaned into him with the ease of long comfort. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Faye asked. "If you had not stopped at the cemetery that day, if you had just kept riding," "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "But then I remind myself that I did stop. That some part of me knew I was supposed to be there, that you were someone important. I was nobody that day, just a woman who had lost everything. You were never nobody." Thomas turned her to face him. "You were always somebody to me from the very first moment, a person worth helping, a woman worth knowing. Eventually, the love of my life." Faye reached up to touch his face, her eyes soft with love. "You gave me reasons to keep living, Thomas. You showed me that life could be good again, that I could be happy again. Everything I have now, every moment of joy, exists because you cared enough to stop. And every moment of joy I have exists because you were brave enough to accept help, to let yourself heal, to take a chance on loving again." Thomas kissed her softly. "We saved each other, Faye. That is what love does." They stood there in the twilight, watching their children play, and Thomas felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This life, this woman, these children, this ranch they had built together from dreams and hard work and unwavering faith in each other. This was everything he had never known to ask for, and he would spend the rest of his days being grateful for it. Samuel ran up to the porch, his face flushed and happy. "Papa, can we have a story before bed?" "Of course." Thomas scooped up his son. "What story do you want to hear?" "The one about how you and Mama met." Samuel loved this story, never seemed to tire of hearing it. Thomas looked at Faye, who smiled and went to collect Rose. They all went inside together, settling into the big chair by the fireplace, the children between them. "It was a spring morning," Thomas began, and Samuel snuggled closer, listening with rapt attention. "The world was fresh from rain, and I was riding to deliver a message. I came to a cemetery, and there I saw your mama kneeling at a grave." As he told the story, simplifying it for young ears, Thomas met Faye's eyes over the children's heads. In her gaze, he saw everything they had been through together, every challenge overcome and every joy celebrated. He saw their past and their present and all the bright promise of their future. Samuel had fallen asleep by the time the story ended, and Rose was yawning widely. Thomas carried Samuel to his room while Faye took Rose, and they tucked the children into their beds with whispered goodnights and gentle kisses. In their own room, Thomas pulled Faye into his arms, and they stood there in the darkness, holding each other. "I love you," he said, as he did every night. "I love you too," she responded, as she always did. They had said these words thousands of times over the years, but they never lost their meaning. Every time was a choice, a promise, a renewal of the commitment they had made to each other on that August afternoon 5 years ago. Thomas thought about the broken woman he had found at a grave, about the hopeless look in her eyes and the weight of grief that had nearly crushed her. Then he thought about the woman in his arms now, strong and vibrant and so full of life, and he marveled at the transformation. Not because he had changed her, but because she had found the strength to change herself, to choose healing over despair, to choose love over loss. She had given him so much more than she probably realized. Purpose when he had been drifting. Direction when he had been lost. A family when he thought he would always be alone. She had taken his kindness and transformed it into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through the generations to come. As they lay down to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Thomas sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For the day he had decided to stop at that cemetery. For the courage to offer help to a stranger. For the wisdom to recognize love when it found him. For the grace that had brought them together and the strength that had kept them together through everything. The Montana night was quiet outside their window, stars bright in the vast sky, and Thomas drifted off to sleep with Faye's heartbeat steady beneath his hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish. But tonight, there was only this, the peace of a life well lived and a love well earned. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Samuel grew tall and strong, showing an early aptitude for working with horses. Rose inherited her mother's green thumb and her father's determination, spending hours in the garden or following Thomas around the ranch. Faye and Thomas added a third child to their family, another son they named William after Thomas's father, and the house rang with laughter and life. The Kane Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Montana territory, but Thomas and Faye never forgot where they came from. They were known for their generosity, often hiring people who needed a second chance, remembering what it meant to be lost and alone. Every year on the anniversary of Samuel Brennan's death, Thomas and Faye would ride out to the family markers on the hill. The wildflowers they had planted years ago had spread and multiplied, covering the area in brilliant color each spring and summer. They would stand there together, sometimes with their children and sometimes alone, and Faye would talk to her family, telling them about the life she had built, the happiness she had found, the legacy they had left behind. "They would be so proud of you," Thomas always told her. "They would be grateful to you," Faye always replied. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas took Faye back to the cemetery where they had first met. The place looked different now, more graves added over the years, the grass thicker and greener. But Samuel's grave was still there, still tended, and Faye knelt beside it like she had that morning so long ago, but this time her eyes were dry and her shoulders were strong, and when Thomas knelt beside her, she took his hand and smiled. "I am happy," she said simply. "Samuel, I am so happy, and I wish you were here to see it, but I think you can see it somehow. I think you know. Your nephew is so much like you, kind and brave and always helping others. Your niece has your laugh. And the life you helped me dream of, the life we started building on that homestead, it has grown into something more beautiful than I ever imagined." Thomas squeezed her hand, his throat tight with emotion. "I miss you every day," Faye continued, her voice steady. "But the missing does not hurt like it used to. Now it is just a gentle ache, a reminder of how much I loved you and how lucky I was to have you as my brother." She touched the grave marker gently. "Thank you for teaching me what family means. I am trying to pass that on to my children, to show them what you showed me." They stayed a while longer, then walked back to their horses hand in hand. As they rode home toward the ranch, toward their children and their life, Thomas looked over at his wife and felt the same rush of love he had felt the day he married her. "No regrets?" he asked. "Not a single one." Faye smiled at him, and it was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. "Every moment, good and bad, led me to you. How could I regret any of it?" Thomas rode closer and leaned over to kiss her, not caring that they were on horseback, not caring who might see. "I love you, Faye Kane. And I love you, Thomas Kane, now and always." The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges as years always do. Montana became a state in 1889, and the Kane family celebrated with their neighbors. The children grew up, Samuel eventually taking over the day-to-day running of the ranch while Thomas focused on breeding and training horses. Rose married a young rancher from the next valley over, and William decided to become a teacher, much to everyone's surprise and pride. Thomas and Faye grew older together, their hair graying and their steps slowing, but their love never dimming. They still ended every day the same way, wrapped in each other's arms, murmuring words of love and gratitude. On a warm summer evening in 1903, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, their grandchildren playing in the yard. Thomas was 70 now, Faye was 68, and they had been married for 25 years. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Faye asked, her hand in his. "When you found me at the grave, I asked if you were all right. After that, you said that sometimes a person needs another person to remind them that living is still worth doing." Faye looked at him, her eyes still that same stormy gray that had captured his heart so long ago. "You have reminded me of that every single day since, not with words but with actions, with love, with your presence and your patience and your unwavering belief that I was worth saving. You were always worth saving." Thomas brought her hand to his lips. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Faye. Everything good in my life stems from the moment I decided to stop at that cemetery. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be grateful for every single day. We gave those things to each other." Faye leaned her head on his shoulder. "That is what love does, Thomas. It multiplies the joy and divides the sorrow. It takes two broken people and makes them whole together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as young Samuel, their grandson and namesake, chased his sister through the flowers. The boy had the same kind heart as his great-uncle, the same desire to help and protect. The cycle continuing, the legacy living on. No regrets. Thomas asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. Not a single one, Faye replied, as she always did. Only gratitude for you, for this life, for every moment we have shared. Thomas pulled her closer, and they stayed there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Two people who had found each other in grief and had built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Two people who had learned that the worst days can lead to the best days, that endings can become beginnings, and that love can grow in the most unexpected places. Behind them, the house they had built together stood strong and solid, full of the sounds of family and life. Before them, the ranch they had created spread across the valley, a testament to hard work and shared dreams. And between them, the love that had started with a simple act of kindness had grown into something eternal, something that would outlast them both and live on in the children and grandchildren who would carry their story forward. Thomas thought about that young man he had been, riding through a cemetery on a spring morning, and he sent up a silent prayer of thanks that he had made the choice to stop, to help, to care, because that choice had given him everything. "Thank you," he whispered into Faye's hair. "For what?" "For saying yes, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." Thomas kissed the top of her head, "For giving me reasons to be glad I kept living too." Faye lifted her head and kissed him properly, and even after all these years, Thomas still felt that spark, that sense of coming home. "Always," she whispered against his lips, "for all the days we have left and beyond, I will always be glad I chose to live, glad I chose you." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Thomas and Faye went inside together, their grandchildren running ahead of them, filling the house with noise and laughter. The door closed behind them, but the light from the windows spilled out warm and golden, a beacon of love and family in the Montana night. This was their happily ever after, not perfect but real, not without challenges but always full of love. Two people who had found each other at the darkest moment and had chosen to walk toward the light together. Two people who proved that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the most unlikely places, and that the greatest love can grow from the smallest acts of kindness. And in the morning, when Thomas woke with Faye beside him, her face peaceful in sleep, he would think as he did every morning that he was the luckiest man alive. Because he had found her kneeling at a grave, and in helping her find reasons to keep living, he had found his own reasons too. Love, family, purpose, joy, all of it stemming from one simple decision on one ordinary morning to stop and help someone who needed it, to offer kindness without expecting anything in return, to see worth in someone who had forgotten her own value. That was the legacy Thomas and Faye would leave behind. Not just the successful ranch or the beautiful family, but the reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life with a single act of compassion. That we all have the ability to give someone a reason to keep living, to keep hoping, to keep believing in the possibility of happiness. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, that act of compassion will come back to us multiplied 1,000 times over, in the form of love that lasts a lifetime and beyond. The end.